I was working on a wrestler build because I wanted to throw around some grapples. Why not? But I was getting confused on how athletics attack work and which bonuses are going to work with my grapples, those kind of questions. And after breaking open the core rulebook, I was just more confused after that. So I did a deep dive on the whole thing just to map it all out, to define all the terms, to turn it into a flow chart, and just sort of soak it all in, soaking it. And it turns out this is actually a really good look at the core attack mechanics that Pathfinder Second Edition runs on. And understanding this stuff, it's really going to help you with your builds. So let's jump right into it.
That was legitness.
Yeah, it was. Welcome to the Crunch McDabble Show. I'm your host, Crunch McDabbles. Let's start right at the beginning. Core Rulebook, page 12, under the Key Terms section, when a creature tries to harm another creature. So an attack, it's just an attempt to harm another creature. You don't even need to be successful. You just have to try, right? Everyone gets a trophy. When a creature tries to harm another creature, it makes a strike or uses some other attack action. Now, an attack action is pretty much the same thing as an attack. It's just an attack in action form. It will have one of these little triangle action symbols. Now, it says when a creature tries to harm another creature, it makes a strike or uses some other attack action. This implies, one, that a strike must be a type of attack, and then 2, that attacks are a category of things then, and 3, that there are potentially other things in this category. And we see in the next sentence, weapon attacks, boing, unarmed attacks, pachoo, grapples, shoves, pow, and then spell attacks. These all fit here in this category called attacks. So you can see all this is starting to break down into categories, and certain things fit in certain categories, so we can start to map this all out. The errata on the Paizo website also has a definition for an attack. It says, an attack is any check that has the attack trait. So this is what the attack trait looks like. And a check, that's going to be a D20 rolled against a DC. And a trait is a keyword that conveys additional information about a rules element. So any check, if it has this little attack trait, it's an attack. And that conveys an additional rules element. Which rules element? Well, all the traits are defined in the glossary, so let's flip there and see what it says. An ability with this trait involves an attack.
What the deuce?
Okay, we're going in circles. Then the second part, this is where it gets more interesting. For each attack you make beyond the first, on your turn you take a multiple attack penalty. And boom, that's it. That's the additional rules element. When something has the attack trait, A, it's an attack, and B, it's subject to the multiple attack penalty. And that's it. That's all that trait means. Don't add anything else to it. That's all it means.
Oh, you were finished. Oh, well, allow me to retort.
See, the tendency would be to say that a roll or a check, if it has the attack trait, then it's an attack roll. That makes a ton of sense. It's logical as far as words and language are concerned, but it's just not the way it is in Pathfinder. The attack roll is defined under the specifics check section on page 446. It says, when you use a strike action or make a spell attack, you attempt a check called an attack roll. Now that sentence was added in the errata, and its whole purpose was to clarify whether skill checks with the attack trait were attack rolls or not. And according to all this, they are not. And there's a whole bunch there to clarify all of that if you want to read it. But what this means is actually really interesting. An attack roll is a really, really specific check, not a broad, all-encompassing term for an attack. It's a specific type of attack that is either a strike or a spell attack. And that's it. Just one of those two things, nothing else. Zip. Nada. Nothing else. So then, these categories have specific things in them as well. A strike is a basic action on page 471. It's a single action, it has the attack trait, and it uses an attack roll. It could be a ranged attack, or it could be a melee attack, and either of those could be with a weapon or unarmed, and there is also the thrown in here under ranged, all of these describe different types of strikes a character could make, and they break up in different ways in different categories. A melee strike, for example, could be an unarmed strike or a weapon melee strike, or an unarmed strike could be a ranged unarmed strike or a melee unarmed strike. And here is the interesting thing. This strike action with all of these different options, it's at the heart of just about all the weapon or unarmed attacks in the game. Take the power attack here. See that in there it says make a melee strike? That tells you how it works and what kind of strike you can make with this attack. So what you'll see is all of these attack abilities you use in the game, they all harness the strike action to make them work. And that's why not all of these abilities have the attack trait, because they use the strike action. And the strike action has the attack trait. So something like Flurry of Blows uses 2 unarmed strikes. So that could be 2 ranged unarmed strikes if you had them, if you were a spined Azarketi, for example. Or Hunter's Aim uses a ranged weapon strike. Or Bullseye uses a strike with a thrown weapon. A Spell Strike uses a melee strike. So you can see the strike action, that attack roll there, that's what all these attacks run on. Now, spell attacks are the other attack rolls, and they don't use strikes. Instead, they use a spell attack, so that's, I guess, the right name for it. You'll see in the description of each one of these, it's going to say, make a spell attack roll. They all have the attack trait, and the caster makes a spell attack versus the target's armor class, and they can use their spellcasting modifier, either charisma or wisdom or intelligence, and their spellcasting proficiency bonus. The point with all these, though, it's not a strike, but it is an attack roll. Oh, yeah. But if we know that grapples, shoves, and trips are attacks, because the book called them attacks back in the description we read of them on page 12, and we also know they are attacks because they have the attack trait, but we know they aren't attack rolls because we know that attack rolls are only strikes and spell attacks, well then what are they? Right? Where are they going to fit in all this? And the answer, it's spelled out in no uncertain terms in the errata. They are skill checks, plain old run-of-the-mill skill checks. It says you still make a skill check with these skills, not an attack roll. So we have to make a separate stem coming off of the attack tree here. It's an attack. It has the attack trait, but it's not an attack roll. It's a skill check. And under skill check attacks, you have grapples, you have trips, you have shoves, etc. So see how all that works? See how that fits in there? So what does all this mean? How do we make this knowledge work for us? Well, the first thing is you have to read each buff carefully. A true strike, for example, is for your next attack roll. So it's not going to work with your athletics, grapples, and trips, but it will work with anything with a strike or a spell attack. The Bless spell and the Bard's Inspire Courage, those are going to be like that too. They work with attack rolls specifically. So unfortunately, those two sources for those easy to get status bonuses that bump up your attacks, they're only going to work with your attack rolls, not your athletics attacks.
No!
Now, while that seems bad and it's a little rough for your grapple wrestler or your shover or your athletic type of build, there are plenty of buffs that still work with your grapples. Really, anything that works with skill checks is going to help you out. Heroism is going to work because it works with skill checks. Even guidance, that cantrip, that works with skill checks. Aid, the aid ability, the action reaction thing, you can use that to help someone with a skill check. The point is you just have to read each one carefully and see what it modifies. And the interesting thing is there are some great abilities that are going to work for you because they are skill checks and not attack rolls. For example, a first level halfling with the halfling luck.
You could ask yourself a question. Do I feel lucky?
Can re-roll a grapple, shove, or trip attempt once a day because they can re-roll a skill check. So that's pretty good right out of the gate to have that ability. It's like a daily true strike for your halfling grappler. And it's even better than a true strike because you get to choose to use it after you fail your roll. It's once a day, but it's still a pretty nice ability. Even better, you can use assurance on athletics checks because they are skill checks. And there's nothing like this for an attack roll. It's unique to skill checks. Now, you also have to read conditions closely too. The enfeebled condition, all that is clearly spelled out. you're going to affect everything that's strength-based. And it says including attack rolls. See, it's written there. And it also includes strength-based athletic checks. So they covered all their bases there. With flat-footed and prone, however, those conditions, they didn't spell it out as well, and we have a problem. Flat-footed gives a -2 circumstance penalty to armor class. The problem is athletics checks, they're attacks versus fortitude or reflex DC, not AC. This would mean, rules as written, when you have a flat-footed target, it's easier to hit them with a weapon, but not easier to trip or grapple them, which doesn't make much sense.
Fight!
And prone is the same way. It says you take a -2 to attack rolls, but nothing about athletics attacks. And this would mean it's harder to hit someone from prone with a weapon, but it's easier to shove them when you're prone. That doesn't make any sense either.
That's the wrong number!
Both of these are clearly, they're not rules as intended. They're easy enough to house rule and fix. They should be fixed. If you just fix both of those, they cancel each other out, basically. You don't get a bonus when you're prone shoving and not a bonus when you're grappling a flat-footed target, right? Works out. Another thing to think about is trying to optimize any abilities you might have. And by looking at this stuff, you can try and figure out how it might work in your favor. Take an ability like Devise a Stratagem from the Investigator. You roll a d20, and if you strike that creature during the round, you can use that d20 for your attack roll. But what you could do, since it doesn't say anything about what kind of strike, it could be any of these kind of strikes here. And there's no indication that you have to declare what kind of strike when you roll a Devise a Stratagem, which means it might be wise for your investigator to keep a fatal weapon handy, or a longbow, a deadly longbow handy, or some other weapon that does some nasty critical damage for when they roll a critical on their Devise a Stratagem. See, if you have two weapons, one that does the best damage on a regular hit and one that does some nasty damage on a critical hit, it means that you can get the best of both worlds. You can leverage this Devise a Stratagem ability to get the most damage, simply because you understand how this attack rolls works and strikes work. So see how that works? All right, we can use our understanding of the attack mechanics to answer these questions then. If I have hand wraps of Mighty Blows, can I use my hand wraps item bonus as an item bonus to my grapple? You cannot, because the weapon potency rune is for attack rolls. See that? However, if you have some sort of unarmed attack that has the grapple trait, you could use your item bonus from your hand wraps, because it says for the weapon traits that if you use that item to make the athletics attack, you can use the item bonus. So if you're in Gorilla Stance, for example, then you can add your item bonus from your hand wraps of Mighty Blows for your grapple athletics check. Next question, if I use an agile weapon or use my hands to grapple or trip someone, is my second multiple attack penalty -4 instead of -5 with my grapple attack? And the answer there is no too. And the reason is because that agile trait is intended for weapon attacks. Weapon attacks, they're over here under attack rolls, so your attacks are going to have a decreased attack penalty, but not a decreased athletics attack penalty. And then the follow-up question, if I use dexterity to hit with the finesse weapon, can I use it for my grapple checks? Well, actually, this one's kind of a maybe when you think about it, because skill checks, they can always use a different ability modifier in place of the key ability, if the DM deems it that way. So potentially, you could convince your DM why your character might be using their dexterity for trips or grapples or shoves. You just have to be a good negotiator. In conclusion, number 1, read entries carefully and understand all these mechanics. Number 2, I think when it's all stacked up, those grapplers and athletic attackers and shovers, they lose out on some bonuses, but they gain some others. And I think the things they gain, like assurance or halfling luck, I think those are pretty strong, making it a net gain overall. And finally, when it's all said and done, I think athletics checks are pretty great. They're cool, interesting alternatives to attack rolls that have some great build potential. And so we can proceed with our animal barbarian wrestler build. Yeah.
Watch out!